You stand barefoot on a floor strewn with crushed reeds and wilted petals. The cottage smells of smoke, sweat, and something metallic. Anticipation turned to fear. Outside, laughter echoes through the night, followed by the pounding of wooden spoons against iron pots. They're waiting, as if for a performance. They will not leave until they hear you scream. Before we step fully into that candlelit room, take a breath. If you find stories like this, where the past feels close enough to touch, then join this strange community of history lovers scattered across the world. Comment below and tell me where you're watching from. It's extraordinary that across oceans and centuries, we can stand together in this flickering light, tracing the shadows of our ancestors. And if you want more journeys into the forgotten corners of human history, don't forget to subscribe and keep the fire burning. In the 14th century, marriage was not a union of hearts, but of households. It was transaction and testimony, sealed not by words, but by blood. When a village gathered to celebrate a wedding, it did not end at the church door. After the priest's Latin benedictions came the bedding. Guests, drunk on ale and expectation, would drag the new couple to their chamber. They would sing bawdy songs, half blessing, half mockery, as they stripped the bride of her veil, then her shift, and tossed her into the bed. The ritual was meant to ensure fertility, but it was also surveillance. The laughter outside masked a deep anxiety, the need to know that the marriage was real, legal, and binding in the eyes of both God and man. Only one proof would suffice: the cry of the bride, the blood on the sheet. In England, France, and the Rhineland, the display of virgin's blood became a grim centerpiece of wedding celebrations. The sheets, once stained, would be paraded through the village the next morning, a crimson banner of honor. But if there was no blood, suspicion grew like rot. Whispers would spread. Was she pure? Was he even man enough to break her? Families could be shamed, marriages annulled, dowries revoked. For women, the cost of anatomy's uncertainty was lethal. A torn hymen might never bleed. Some were born without one at all. Yet in the medieval imagination, this fragile membrane was more than flesh. It was a moral currency. A young woman's body was her father's collateral, her husband's proof of ownership, her community's stage. Chroniclers describe wedding nights with the same precision they used for battles. In 1328, in a small Flemish town, witnesses were summoned to confirm the consummation of a noble union. Two matrons stood just beyond the curtain, listening for movement, for gasps and cries that would certify legality. One later testified, "The lady did not protest, but the sound was like that of weeping." Even kings were not exempt from such rituals. In 1422, when Henry V of England married Catherine of Valois, a royal physician was ordered to attend the bed to ensure the act was complete. The physician later recorded with dispassionate clarity, "The king did labor with diligence. It was not love, it was governance." Sex in the medieval world was never truly private. It was a communal event regulated by law, religion, and superstition. The Church claimed authority over every thrust and sigh, declaring which days were pure enough for coupling. Never on Fridays, never during Lent, never on holy feasts. Yet the same institution blessed the wedding bed with prayers that sounded almost pagan in tone. "Multiply as the stars of heaven," priests would chant, sprinkling holy water on the sheets as though sanctifying a battlefield. What did it mean for a girl of 15, her hands trembling beneath the rough linen, to carry that weight? She was told her pain was holy, her blood sacred. She was told that through this suffering she became a wife, a vessel for life. The theology was brutal. To resist was sin. To submit was salvation. In the flickering half-light, the line between ritual and violation vanished. Husbands, driven by duty or desire, did what was expected. Wives, bound by doctrine and fear, endured. Medieval law did not recognize marital rape. It could not exist because a wife's body was her husband's property. A chronicler from York once wrote, "A wife's refusal is no sin of the husband, but a failing of her obedience." And yet there were whispers of rebellion, tiny, dangerous acts of resistance. Some brides smeared chicken blood on their thighs to fake the proof their husbands demanded. Others sought out midwives who knew the secrets of herbs that could dull pain or spark fertility. One 14th-century midwife, tried for witchcraft in Rouen, confessed under torture that she taught the young to deceive their lords on the wedding night. Her knowledge was called sorcery, her execution, justice. The spectacle of consummation extended beyond the chamber. In some regions, newlyweds were expected to appear naked at their window the next morning, proof that the deed was done and the marriage blessed. Those who refused risked gossip and humiliation. For the medieval mind, the private body was a public truth. Shame and sanctity were stitched into every act of intimacy. Over time, these customs hardened into law. Church courts heard cases of impotentia, when a husband failed to consummate. Physicians were summoned to examine both parties. The woman's body became evidence, her testimony dissected, her dignity irrelevant. If no consummation could be proven, the marriage was dissolved, and the woman returned unclean to her father's house. The candle on the bedside table burned low as these dramas played out across centuries. Its flame illuminated the faces of countless brides, each one caught between fear and duty. The rushes beneath their feet whispered of footsteps before them, of generations bound by ritual and silence. And when the light finally guttered out, the room returned to darkness. But the echo remained. The rustle of linen, the faint hum of distant laughter, and the slow, inevitable rhythm of a world that turned human intimacy into public theater. Because in the medieval night, love was not private, purity was not gentle, and blood, warm and bright against the cloth, was both proof and punishment. The candle sputters in the draught, its thin flame throwing long shadows over vellum. A monk bends close to his parchment, the tip of his quill whispering through ink. He writes not poetry, nor prayer, but prohibition, a list of sins born from the body. On Sundays, abstain. On Fridays, abstain. In Lent, at Advent, upon feast days, in daylight, abstain. The scratching of pen against skin echoes like confession. He pauses, glances at the crucifix above his desk, and adds another line. To couple for pleasure alone is mortal sin. To the medieval church, desire was both a divine trap and a human necessity. Sex, they taught, was the means by which life continued, but also the road by which souls fell. Between heaven and hell lay the bed, its linens as perilous as a battlefield. The saints wrote volumes to explain this paradox, how a husband might lie with his wife without offending God, how pleasure might exist only if never sought. The great architects of medieval morality, St. Augustine, St. Jerome, and later Thomas Aquinas, turned passion into a discipline of logic. Augustine, once a lover and libertine, had written, "Give me chastity, Lord, but not yet." By the time his words reached the pulpits of Europe, they were stripped of humor, turned into law. Jerome thundered from his cell in the desert, warning that every woman was a snare of Satan, every touch a descent. And Aquinas, precise as a mathematician, ranked the sins of the flesh as though mapping the stars. Adultery, less damning than incest; masturbation, worse than lustful thought. In the cold stone of monasteries, this theology found its echo in silence. Novices were taught to sleep with their hands crossed upon their chests, to avoid the sin of the wandering hand. A bell rang at midnight for matins. The groan of the wind through the cloister arches sounded almost human. "Temptation comes when the body warms," wrote one abbot, and so the body must be kept cold. In the morning they would confess dreams to their priors, images that had intruded like demons in the night. But what of the world beyond the cloister? What of the peasants who toiled in fields, the women who bled and bore in darkness. Their understanding of sin came not from books, but from the pulpit and the confessional. There, behind the lattice of the booth, desire was dissected like a crime. A priest's voice, low, deliberate, would ask, "How often? In what manner? Did you take pleasure?" And when the penitent wept, he would prescribe penance in ratios of guilt: 3 days fasting for the sin of the flesh, a pilgrimage for adultery, silence for shame. The Church's control over desire was absolute because it touched the invisible, the conscience. Every impulse became suspect, every embrace a test of faith. Even married couples bound by sacrament lived under its shadow. A husband who approached his wife too eagerly risked damnation. A wife who enjoyed the act risked worse. The theologian Peter Lombard declared that a woman's cry of delight is the whisper of Eve in Eden. Yet, beneath the sermons and the fear, another world thrived. In candlelit taverns and behind monastery walls, the forbidden flowered in secret. Monks exchanged lewd verses disguised as psalms. Nuns wrote love letters hidden in prayer books. In the archives of Avignon lies the record of Sister Agnes, accused in 1324 of excessive fondness toward another nun. When questioned, she replied softly, "I did but love her soul through the vessel God made." The Church, obsessed with purity, saw the devil's fingerprints everywhere. Nocturnal emissions were blamed on succubi, female demons who seduced men in sleep. Women who woke breathless were said to have been visited by incubi. Confessors debated whether such sin came from within or without, whether the dreamer was victim or accomplice. Manuals for priests instructed, if the sinner claims the devil lay with her, question her closely on the nature of the seed. Flesh became theology, the body, a battlefield where angels and demons warred unseen. Even kings trembled before this doctrine. Philip the Fair of France once sought papal guidance when his queen failed to conceive. The answer from Rome was curt. Too much passion, even between spouses, angered God. The royal bed, like the peasant's cot, was governed by the same invisible rule. Love was permitted only when stripped of pleasure, and so medieval Europe became a continent of contradictions. Saints who wrote about chastity with obsessive sensuality, sinners who confessed every thought but not every act. In sermons, the word lust rolled from priests' tongues with a strange reverence, as though they too felt its heat. But repression breeds fantasy. The more the Church forbade, the more it imagined. Artists painted Eve with curves too soft, angels with lips too full. The same monks who denounced the body decorated manuscripts with marginalia of naked men wrestling frogs, nuns embracing demons, and rabbits carrying phallic lances. It was as if the forbidden, driven underground, erupted in the only space still safe: the page. By the late Middle Ages, even scholars began to wonder if salvation could truly coexist with such suspicion of the flesh. The mystic Hadewijk of Antwerp wrote in her visions of a love that consumed both soul and body, a union too pure to name sin. The inquisitors read her words and called them dangerous. And somewhere in a silent cell, a monk lays down his quill. The candle gutters, its light trembling across the inked words, concupiscentia, lust. He blows out the flame, but the scent of wax and parchment lingers, heavy as breath. Outside, the night is quiet, but in the dark, the mind stirs. Desire never truly dies. It only hides, waiting for confession. The woman lies beneath a thatched roof, her breath shallow, her hands slick with the sap of crushed leaves. Smoke curls from a clay bowl beside her, mingling with the scent of damp earth and burning sage. Somewhere beyond the door, a church bell tolls, its hollow voice cutting through the moorland air. She whispers a prayer, not to the Virgin, but to something older. To heal is to risk damnation. To bleed is to prove she still belongs to life. In the medieval world, The female body was both sacred vessel and dangerous enigma. Men wrote about it endlessly, priests, physicians, and philosophers, all trying to map what they could not feel. They called it mysterium carnis, the mystery of the flesh. The womb, they said, was restless, a creature of its own will. If left unfilled, one 13th century scholar warned, it wanders upward, choking the lungs and clouding the mind. And so, a woman's sanity was tethered to her fertility. Her body's stillness depended on her submission. The remedies were as strange as the fears that birthed them. A woman deemed hysterical might be fumigated with the smoke of burned rosemary beneath her skirts, or pressed with hot stones until she remembered her purpose. Others were told to inhale the scent of burned horsehair to lure the womb back to its rightful place. When such rituals failed, the blame shifted from the body to the soul. Priests began to speak of possession, demons nesting where doctors saw disease. In the 12th century, the boundaries between medicine and magic were porous as the walls of a village hut. Healing herbs grew side by side with charms, prayers with spells. Midwives who had long guided women through childbirth and miscarriage carried knowledge older than any cathedral. They knew which roots could dull pain, which seeds could delay conception, which oils might coax a still womb into life again. Yet, with every life they saved, they invited suspicion. One midwife from Trier, recorded only as Alma, was accused in 1312 of using words of heathen power. Her defense was simple. I spoke as my mother spoke. But the Church had no patience for inheritance of this kind. By the 14th century, Malleus Maleficarum, the hammer of witches, would declare that women who meddled in birth or fertility work by the devil's art, seeking mastery over nature's law. The same hands that delivered life were now seen as capable of summoning death. Medicine itself began to harden into hierarchy. University-trained physicians, all men, claimed the authority once held by village women. They dissected animals and wrote of human anatomy as if by guesswork. Their Latin treatises declared that women were colder, moister, weaker, an imperfect man, as Aristotle had said. Every curve, every softness, became evidence of inferiority. The womb was no longer a wonder, but a threat, an organ to be controlled. Even childbirth, the most human of experiences, became a site of suspicion. The cries of labor were interpreted as punishment for Eve's sin. When complications arose, priests were summoned to perform exorcisms over the birthing bed. "Leave her, foul spirit," one 14th century manual instructed, "for she bears the seed of the faithful." If the mother died, her body was open to baptize the child within, a final act of devotion and violation entwined. Yet beneath this machinery of faith and fear, women continued to resist in whispers. They brewed teas of pennyroyal and tansy when they could not afford another child. They tied amulets of coral or dried fig beneath their skirts, charms against both conception and gossip. In some villages, church altars concealed fertility offerings, bundles of hair, bits of wax shaped like wombs, prayers written in secret script. These were not acts of rebellion, but survival, a quiet insistence on control over their own bodies. Still, the price of knowledge grew steeper. In 1485, a healer named Brigida of Aragon was burned for teaching women how to cast out the moon, a phrase meaning to end a pregnancy. Witnesses said she died singing. Others were whipped through the streets, branded or exiled to convents where silence was their only confession. Behind these persecutions lay a deeper terror, the fear that women's power over life and blood rivaled God's own. To master that power, the Church had to name it evil, and so every herb became suspect, every whisper a spell, every womb a potential vessel of corruption. In the cold chambers of monasteries, scholars continued their dissection of desire and disease. They wrote of humors and vapors, of wombs that crawled, of women driven mad by the moon. Their words traveled farther than any woman's footsteps, shaping centuries of medicine to come. Outside, the healer's smoke thins into the night. The bell tolls again, distant but relentless. Somewhere, another woman hides her bundle of herbs beneath the floorboards, heart hammering as boots approach. The door shudders under a priest's fist. For in a world where healing and heresy share the same scent, the line between saint and witch burns away in the firelight.